And now, it's The Law Show on CL 650. A comprehensive look at everything you need to know about the law.
I fall for law and the law one. I fall for law and the law one. I needed money cause I had none.
And welcome to The Law Show on CL 650. I'm Zach Spencer, and joining me in studio today, Gordon Maynard and Rudy Kisher, immigration lawyers at MKS in downtown Vancouver. And your offices moved. You used to be in Yaletown, patios.
Yes, and
nice long lunches, all that. So now
brick and wood. Now we're down in the banking district. We're at Granville and Hastings at 688 Hastings on the 9th floor.
And you have a bigger place.
Bigger. We've increased our size by 40%, and we've hired some associates, and we're in a beautiful building right next to the Burks building. Yeah.
So you are expanding because there's more demand to become Canadians?
I think Minister McCallum has increased the numbers, so there are more immigrants coming to Canada. There's more foreign workers coming to Canada. There's more students coming to Canada, and I think we've seen the success of us being around for a long time. So
more refugees too.
There's more refugees coming to Canada too.
So before we get into the nuts and bolts of what we want to talk about today, how is Canada seen in the world as a place to land? I mean, United States would probably be number one, I would think, for many people. So what is the motivation for many people wanting to come to Canada?
I think what people don't realize is there's a limited number of people limited number of countries where you can immigrate to without having some sort of connection to the country, in a sense, having a family member there. And even with family members, it's very limited, the number of places you can immigrate to. So, Canada is one of a handful of places up there where sort of New Zealand, Australia, the United States, that has an immigration policy that sort of is open, and the EU, the UK, right? Although we see that changing, right? So we're limited. When you look at why people come to Canada, we see a variety of reasons. I mean, people from Asia. My shock, I was very naive when I started in this job. I believed people were coming to Canada for the freedoms, freedom of speech, participation in democracy. It wasn't that at all. I mean, my first.
The true north, strong and free, all that stuff, right?
Yeah, that's why I thought they were coming, because, they're going to have freedom. They're leaving a communist country. And the simple answer was no, it's the air. Mm-hmm. In fact, I can see the sunshine. It's the beautiful nature when I arrive. And that's one of the driving reasons.
Well, I know I have traveled to China several times now. I can show you pictures on my phone of Shanghai and Beijing. It looks like the foggiest day in Vancouver is a smoggy day there, and it's not the smoggiest day that I witnessed. I said to them, "Is this really bad? Is this like one of the?" No, it gets worse than this. Yeah. So I think a lot of people, especially from mainland China, want to come because their kids can grow up and drink the water and breathe the air without worry.
And in our office, we also see a lot of people coming from South America, and they're coming for safety reasons. So, they could live anywhere, and in terms of they've got a lot of wealth, and they pick to come to Vancouver or Toronto, etc. But they come to Canada because their kids are safe, right? They all have stories of where they've been held up at gunpoint, relatives that have been kidnapped, and they have a lot of financial means, and they're looking for some safety.
Now, Gordon, do you see a spike when you have terrorism activities in places like France and around the world related to these cells and what have you? People think, oh, where's a safe place for my family to live? Do you get any?
I haven't seen that out of Europe, but every American election, you get a spike from one side or the other.
Right. And we'll see that this November.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. Seeing it now.
Depending how the Donald does, yeah.
All right. So I just want to kind of get a sort of a lay of the land of why people want to come to Canada. Obviously, a lot of it is economic. They've got a job here. They want to come here. So there was a town hall recently with Minister McCallum's chief of staff, Bernie Darable. Is that how you say the last name?
Yes.
Bernie Darable. So can you give us a little bit about where this town hall took place, who was there, what was said, and who took notes? Gordon, you want to take that one over?
The answer is we don't know who took these notes.
Okay.
And he wasn't there.
Oh. Okay, I guess our time is done.
These notes were circulated broadly. There was a town hall meeting at a Liberal riding at the invitation of the MP. The minister, John McCallum, was supposed to be there, but he couldn't make it, and so his chief of staff went.
So this is a high-ranking person.
Sure. Sure, within the minister's office, for sure. And the discussion was about immigration and changes that were likely to come down, or not likely to come down, but changes being contemplated. And an individual there took notes and said it was a wonderful meeting and very impressed. And he listed 17 things that were talked about. This isn't verbatim. And the list got circulated through about 3 hands before it showed up on the internet. So who knows how accurate it is. But as a snapshot of areas of interest and worth looking at to see, areas that the immigration program is going to be poked and prodded, it's very valuable. So we thought we might go down that list and see what's being suggested, apparently, and why.
Okay, so this is, being passed on through your community and the law community about immigration. But the government hasn't shot back and said, no, these things aren't happening, right?
No, we see no response on that.
We see no response. So, all right. So let's get into it and see what possibly the chief of staff of what is the ministry called? Immigration
and Refugees Citizenship Canada.
Yeah, okay. IRCC.
And Bernie Darrable, what was supposedly said there? Let's go through them one by one.
So the first one they bring up is the 4-year restriction. They're going to drop that. And so for our listeners that don't know what this is a horrible restriction. When it came in, I think everybody in our office was kind of shocked, and it was brought in by the Conservatives that says you can only, if you work. If you're not we're going to bring in a restriction for how long you can work in Canada if you come over to Canada as a temporary foreign worker. So if you come to Canada as a temporary foreign worker, there will be some exemptions. For example, people in executive jobs, right? So an O level is exempt from that. But if you are, if you're in a B level, so it's a level of, so a B level occupation, mid-manager, or a mechanic, for example. So I had a lot of unfortunate clients that fell into this category. So you come to Canada, for example, as a mechanic, and you're working on as we know as an LMIA, a labor market impact
or
assessment,
any work permit.
So you've shown that there is some exemptions, but if you come in on an LMI, for example, and because there's no exemption on the NAFTA ones, right? So you come in on this work permit, and you're working, you're only allowed to stay in Canada for 4 years. Now, the reason the Conservatives brought this in was the idea is that we don't want to create a class of people that are forever here on work permits. And so the thought was, within 4 years, either you apply for permanent residency, become a permanent resident, right? Or you go home.
But wouldn't that make sense that if you're here and you want to stay, you want to make a commitment?
Well, but why is, so for example, there's a boom going on in Edmonton, right? Let's say, so the oil patch is going crazy and you're working up there. Now, you're happy while the boom kind of times are here, but you got no intention of staying here longer than that. And why as Canadians, as an employer, do I really care? Right? This person's here is filling the job now. Now I've got to say to that guy, you're going to have to do a lot of paperwork and you're going to have to pay a lot of money for something you don't want. Mm-hmm. I don't understand why the government was sticking its nose in that, except for this overreaching idea that, well, we don't want a temporary force, where people, they're getting paid a good salary. They want to be here maybe for 5 years. Maybe that's their plan, and they're going to go back to the United States.
And it was proven that they're not taking a job away from a Canadian.
Yeah, they've already proven.
So it's a job that needs somebody from outside the country to fill.
Yeah, they made a whole bunch. It became a bureaucratic nightmare. I mean, first of all, they made a list of exemptions that the 4-year rule didn't apply to, so you got to look those up and see if you fall into that. And then they said you count the 4 years only by actual work days in Canada, so if you leave Canada and you're not here for a period of time, you subtract that away and you can get credit back for that. So it just became a nightmare to use, and to what end?
So that change you believe would be a good one?
I think it's a great change. I mean, you can imagine an employer just going irate at the government. You got to tell me I got a guy that's making me, I'm paying him $80, and he's maybe producing for me $200,000 a year, and he has to go home now, right? Maybe he doesn't qualify for immigration. Maybe he doesn't want to immigrate. Maybe there's tax, whatever the reasons are, you're saying that I have to send him home now. It was horrible.
All right, what's the next one? A blanket LMIA or exemptions?
Yeah, we're talking about labor market impact assessments there, and this was the program. It's one of the areas of how foreign workers get work permits in Canada is based on employer advertising and demonstrating that they can't find a Canadian to do the job. They apply to Service Canada, and Service Canada issues an LMIA. And 2014, the prior government overhauled the system and accused business of abusing the program. They said Canadians were supposed to be hired first. They wanted to make it harder to get LMIAs. And so they put in a system that became much more expensive, much more time-consuming, much more difficult to work with. It has been heavily, heavily criticized by the entire business sector across Canada. Anybody that uses foreign workers does not like the changes to the labour market impact assessment system. And so what they're talking about here is trying to relieve some of the difficulties with the program. They're talking about identifying certain sectors where the employers will not need to apply for an LMIA.
Could you give me an example of a sector that might be exempt?
They're suggesting, well, I've heard that they're talking about cooks. We have our own ideas as to what might be a good idea.
There's already one. There is already one here in BC for animation artists. So somebody working in an animation studio, you get
in computer games. And stuff like that.
So you get the LMI, but you don't have to advertise. So you're exempt from this whole. You got to pay the right wage. So in Alberta, you used to have a long list of about 8 or 9 of them. Sort of pipe fitters, usually a lot of tradespeople, heavy-duty mechanics. So the idea is to bring that back, which I think is a good idea. I'm surprised that they're going that route, given the unemployment being as high as it is, but they're going to target specific industries, right?
Okay.
Well, you were talking on the way here about an idea. You want to pass that on, but based on salary?
Well, I mean, to me, it always shocks me that we're going through a bureaucratic process when a Canadian employer, let's say, pick a number if you like, but let's say $100,000. So if I'm paying a foreign national $100,000, do I really have to advertise to show that I can't find a Canadian to do that job? Right? We don't have a cap right now. So, I'm paying as an employer, if I'm paying somebody that much and bringing them in, my guess is the employer's probably done his homework and can't find someone here to do the job because he'd get somebody cheaper, right? If he could. Right? So do we really need this bureaucratic step process for somebody, let's say, making over $80,000? I think they still have to be vetted to make sure they're genuine offers, but I think it's something the government could look at and say at a cap, listen, anybody making over $100,000, my guess is the Canadians in Canada at $100,000 don't need the government's protection.
Right. Okay. The next one is pay for language training.
In order to bring in groups of workers.
So what does that mean?
No idea. Not a clue. I don't understand what they're getting at their language training to support permanent resident applications down the road.
That's kind of where my gut goes. Is one of the fears, right? And you see this when you're bringing in, when the economy was really booming, we had a lot of workers coming in, whether it was in the mining sector or to work in trades that had very poor language skills. So they would qualify to get to Canada to start working. And then the next step is, how do we apply for permanent residency? The whole system now is what we see is the government's pitch has been, listen, the most successful immigrants are the ones that have high language ability, and those are the ones we're going to take.
But your explanation several shows ago of the guy who works in a restaurant and he only speaks Thai or Chinese or Korean or whatever in the restaurant with other Thai and Chinese and Korean workers, they're not going to learn the language because they're surrounded with people of the same language. So is this to help those people?
Yeah, and it's a good idea because for those people, although they have an LMIA work permit, for them to fit into an economic selection program in express entry, they need to have a language skill. It's a requirement, mandatory. So if you're going to bring in a skilled worker, but they have low language, and you want to keep them down the road, you're going to have to give them language training. So if that's what they're talking about, I can see that, and they already do that now as part of the LMIA process. But the language here, groups of workers, confuses me too.
Maybe groups as categories, maybe something like that. Maybe that's the way the notes were taken.
Yeah, again. Yeah, exactly.
All right, we have to take a quick break. We're speaking with Gordon Maynard and Rudy Kisher from MKS Law in downtown Vancouver, talking about immigration law and a meeting that was held with the chief of staff from the ministry, Bernie Darrable, and somebody took notes, and we're going through the different points, and we'll pick up on those next on CL 650.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.